Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Financial Institutions Leaders View. I'm Eriola Beetz. I'm a managing director and partner with BCG, and today I'm joined by climate scientist Dr Celine Herweijer. She has advised multiple banks on climate and sustainability, and she is also the Group Chief Sustainability Officer at HSBC on the Group Executive Board. Celine is responsible for the development and implementation of HSBC's sustainability strategy. Thanks very much for joining us today, Celine.
Hi, Eri. Nice to be here.
To begin with, could you talk us through a little bit about your view on sustainability trends for 2023 and beyond, and also the role of financial institutions within that?
I think we start 23. If we think about climate, we're still way behind where we need to be. I think 2030 always seemed like a long way away still. It's 7 years to go. We've got to halve global emissions in 7 years. We've got to get to net zero by 2050. So this is really real now. And again, as we enter the year, we had such a turbulent year last year. The war in Ukraine, the energy crisis, the global economy outlook. But we really have to go into a year of rapid scaling of action right now. And actually one thing that 22 did do is it brought to the fore the importance of energy security and energy transition hand in hand. And actually that a lot of the solutions for energy security mean energy transition. And actually in a way, when we look at it now and we look forward, it's probably accelerated in the medium term, the energy transition we have ahead. So that's one, ramping up, hugely climate action. We're really out of time. The second one will be nature. We obviously had finally a kind of global deal on nature, COP15, which is fantastic. Really strong targets there from governments. And I think now from the kind of business world, whether it's financial institutions or corporates, it's really about what does that mean? How do we integrate that? How do we start measuring, managing, disclosing our risks from nature as well?
So Celine, just following up on those trends, how do you see the role of financial institutions in supporting the global transition to net zero?
Yeah, so in 2 decades, we need to remake the whole backbone of the global economy. It's going to cost a heap. My estimates are 5 trillion a year by 2030, probably about 2 trillion a year before then. We have to transform every industry of the economy, and finance is what shapes the future, right? So we need to be directing finance towards that transition. And there's 2 ways of doing that banks are looking at. One is the kind of pure green stuff. So how do we unlock and finance the new technologies, even the existing infrastructure that we know about, solar, wind, electrification, all of that infrastructure that we know well, but that the nascent technologies like clean hydrogen, like new batteries, things like that. So one is directing finance in there to kind of rebuild industries and infrastructure. But also just in general, everything we need to do with every client we bank, we need to work with them to finance their own transition, to help make sure that they are transitioning, they have a transition plan, and we're financing that decarbonization of their businesses, right? So it's mainstream, but it's also the directed capital as well. So we've got a huge role to play in that.
HSBC has been trailblazing on this path. It's one of the founding members of the Net Zero Banking Alliance, along with other banks. It's formed great partnerships and has made great contributions in other working groups like PCAF. We know that HSBC has made very public commitments around climate and sustainability. Could you talk us a little bit through those commitments, what they mean, and what is HSBC doing to actually deliver those commitments?
So I spoke a bit about industry needs to transform, the global economy needs to transform. Well, we need to transform as HSBC. We really, really recognize that. And there's a number of different ways we need to do that. So first of all, as I mentioned, we have to rewire the bank for this whole new metric of this thing called financed emissions, so that when we look at our portfolio, when we make strategic portfolio allocation decisions, when we look at our risk appetite as a whole across the group and in certain areas, when we make decisions on individual transactions, when we engage with our clients, each time now into that decision making, we feed in this thing called financed emissions. How many emissions are resulting from what we're financing or facilitating, right? So that's a whole new KPI we have to manage against and manage down from an impact perspective. So that's one thing, but also we recognize that we need to unlock capital for the transition at scale as well. And so there's also some replumbing that we need to do to say, do we have the right expertise to make sure we know how to bank all these nascent new technologies that need to be kind of rolled out at scale to decarbonize, whether it's steel or cement or change the shape of these different industries, right? So there's a new amount of capability, there's a new type of decision making we have to make. And we've made some high level commitments, in terms of what is our architecture. We've made this commitment to 1 trillion, as you say, of financing and investment towards the transition and sustainability more broadly. So that could be anything from, project renewables finance through to sustainability linked bonds at the corporate level. So a variety through to natural capital funds, whatever it might be. And in addition to that 1 trillion, as I mentioned, it's decarbonizing our entire book and how we engage with clients at scale from, SMEs all the way up to the biggest corporations in the world, to engage with them, to support them on the transition and understand their transition plans and advise them on how to kind of accelerate those transitions.
A lot of studies show that there's a lot of capital needed to finance the transition. You mentioned the 5 trillion number. We've done numerous studies showing that these numbers are quite big. However, one report from BCG and Rockefeller Foundation found that only 16% of that is already funded. And financial institutions typically will say there is a lack of pipeline on the new technologies that is suitable for financial institutions to invest that are potentially sub-hurdle. Is there a scope to be thinking about this differently in order to unlock those funding flows to where it's needed most?
Yeah, and I think the environment is changing massively now, right? The commerciality of renewables is now very different, especially with high oil and gas prices as they are right now. So the environment is shifting just from that perspective, the technology cost down curve. At the same time, we have a whole heap of new industrial policy coming in, right? The US Inflation Reduction Act is game-changing for electric vehicles, for solar, for hydro, for hydrogen, et cetera, in the US. So we have this changing environment, which is changing the economics of these deals. So that's one thing. The reality, though, is we still have a cost of capital issue. We still have the reality to invest in the same solar project, let's say at scale, is going to be 3 times more cost of capital in India or China than it will be in Europe, or 10 times more cost of capital in sub-Saharan Africa. And actually that's where we need to do that investment at scale, because that's where we need to change the energy system from being coal reliant, let's say in Asia, through to a clean energy system, right? So there's a big cost of capital challenge. The other thing is that the treatment, the regulatory treatment of that, the way it's treated at the moment. Anything that's a long-term deal, so if you want to finance the renewables projects that's 10, 20-year tenor, that has a high cost of capital, right? It's expensive for us to do on our balance sheet. We can only do a certain amount of it because of capital treatment. If we want to back a new company in a really exciting new climate tech space, again, because they're unfamiliar, they're more risky, those types of investments also have a higher cost of capital. In other words, the 2 things we need to do most is very difficult for us to do under current regulatory treatment on our balance sheet, but we still have to find a way to do it at scale because we still need to unlock that 5 trillion a year by 2030.
Shifting focus a bit to COP27.
Yeah.
I would be very interested in getting your perspective, Celine. So COP27, there was a perception that the whole climate movement, the momentum slowed down a little bit. But then on the positive side, it was dubbed the COP of implementation. Because of the willingness of organizations to change and to deliver on their commitments. What are some of the ways that we can build on these positives?
I mean, I'd say COP27 wasn't a slowdown. I think it's just got to a point within the current architecture of negotiations. Actually, the real action now is in the real economy, not just purely negotiating fine text after 27 years, right? That needs to happen, but actually what needs to happen going forward in the COP process, and there was a real recognition of this, is we need multi-stakeholder action. And so the big hope for COP28 is actually we start to get more formally into the COP agenda and the COP process, implementation action from the private sector, from business, from finance, from governments all together on kind of transformational kind of implementation plays within the COP process. So for me, that was it, was a shift again towards implementation, towards multi-sector action.
And you mentioned partnerships. Could you give us some examples of what HSBC is doing in this space? HSBC has been very active on doing multiple partnerships, but any highlights that you'd like to talk about?
So some of the things that we launched at COP27, for example, were these country platforms. So a lot of it now is around country level action, especially in emerging economies where you have a high amount of like business as usual emissions growth, because as I mentioned, they could be coal reliant. So Indonesia, for example, we were part of a partnership with a number of different governments, some MDBs and others, on launching the Just Energy Transition program, essentially, for working with the Indonesian government to bring in different types of capital to help them finance both a pipeline of clean energy investment, but also early wind down of coal assets within the country as well. Something similar for Vietnam, something similar with the government of Egypt with a slightly different name. So we're going to start seeing more of these country level platforms to accelerate action, and then public and private, so the banks and other types of financiers also kind of coming in with the MDBs and with the government to try and again get over some of these hurdles around cost of capital.
And HSBC has been the bank that connects the world, east to west, supply chains. But equally, HSBC has got a strategy of being relevant in Asia, Middle East, where a lot of the climate action needs to happen. Any thoughts you can offer on that?
Yeah, I think that's our strength as a bank, is that we have this east to west, access, right? And we are a global to local bank, right? And a couple of different things on that. One is whatever we do, whether it's a new policy, whether it's a new ask for client transition plans, whether it's setting a target for a whole sector at a global level to decarbonize in our portfolio, we have to bear in mind that these are global level ambitions we're setting, but it's really important how they play out at a local level, because it's very different if you're sitting there and you are, for example, the main power provider in a country like Indonesia, where you have a 65% plus coal generation in your grid, and you have to shift to when you're in a country like Germany, which has a phase-out date for coal of 2030, and a very different kind of setup in terms of the share of renewables in power production right now. So every single time we put in these new kind of global level targets, commitments, policies, we really have to think about how we can make sure they work in the emerging economies as well, how to engage with our clients in those economies where, again, most of the emissions growth is happening, right? So we have to really think about implementation in a way that brings everyone along and brings in inclusivity and just transition into that. It's not easy, but it's critical, because the biggest impact we can have is being relevant in the energy transition and the heavy industry transition in the markets that basically shape the future of those.
HSBC has got a huge role to play, has had a huge role to play on multiple transitions in past history, and this is probably the biggest one. What makes HSBC unique, or what can HSBC uniquely contribute to the global transition to net zero?
It's a really good question, because I think the fundamental ambition for us, right, it's not we get to a net zero portfolio by 2050, it's that we have the maximum impact on a net zero global economy by 2050. That's the way we're looking at it. And then we have to think about what are our strengths, right? We have been supporting the energy sector in the markets that are the key to future energy supply and demand, Middle East, Asia, or around the world, where emissions growth is potentially going to be the fastest. And so we can have a huge impact on the energy transition of the global economy if we stay relevant to supporting the national energy actors in those markets. Not if we introduce a policy now, which means I'm sorry, we can't work with you, power producer in Indonesia, because you're not quite there yet in coal production. We have to have a way of working with our clients, helping, speeding up the transition and doing that finance. So number one is that. So energy transition is going to be huge for us. Our role in the heavy industry transition is going to be critical. As I mentioned, Asia is also, with our footprint in Asia, the manufacturing hub of the world, right? So the heavy industry transition is going to be made, we're going to make or break that transition depending on how heavy industry in Asia transitions. And we've got a huge amount of focus going there as well. Nature, land use, we support global supply chains. We're the biggest trade and supply chain, one of the biggest trade and supply chain banks in the world. 10x of emissions from any company comes from the supply chain, not from direct operations. So everything we can do to support our clients on decarbonizing their supply chains, again, is massive. And then obviously, we've been critical as a bank to supporting entrepreneurs, innovation, all through the, previous decades. And again, as we look ahead, the biggest sets of innovations, it's the climate tech entrepreneur system is the biggest area of venture capital investment, the biggest area of early stage kind of company growth at the moment as you look at markets. So we really want to get behind these new economy pioneers and help them scale and grow so they can provide the solution to incumbent large companies and help the industrial transformation we have ahead, the green industrial transformation.
So over the last 12 months, a lot of things have happened, not least the impact of the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine, inflation increases in a lot of countries. Could you offer some perspectives or outlook around how these developments are affecting the movement of climate transition?
Yeah, maybe let's just go down the energy vertical for now, because we are in the world's first global energy crisis. And the short-term impact was, because of rising gas prices, to kind of pump up coal-fired power capacity, right? So we've had that happen in power plants across the world. And overall, the modeling right now, 12 months later, is suggesting because of that increased coal use within power production, displacing even gas there, and what's happened as a result is we've had probably a quarter of the impact we've had overall from a climate perspective has been negative. But at the same time, the response to the energy security has also been, how do we unleash renewables and clean energy deployment, right? There is no geopolitical risk considerations there. We have abundant, clean, deflationary energy sources when we think about clean energy. So at the moment, the modeling is suggesting there's been a heap of now new industrial policy, removing of permitting barriers, what we've seen again with the Inflation Reduction Act, Renew EU, increased investment in China. For the first time ever, 22-23, we have a pipeline in terms of renewables projects that is what we need at the scale we need for a 1.5 degree pathway that IEA have said, right? So 3/4 of the impact actually for climate is going to be positive. And the impact is only short term. Probably what it's also done is it's the golden age of gas that was predicted early in the 2010s is actually, we're now beyond it. Gas is being pushed out of power production even quicker because again of the kind of plummeting cost of renewables. So we're going to see gas replaced from power production already in many advanced economies, but even in emerging economies much more quickly. And we're, as I said, we're kind of seeing this kind of much more channeled investment into clean energy as well.
So that is wonderful to hear and really positive note. Before we close, what gives you hope?
So I think, as you know, if you work on climate change, you have to be an optimist, right? We've got such a massive challenge ahead to, as I mentioned, remake the global economy in 2 decades. But the implications of not doing so are unfathomable, right? So we have to be optimists. But actually, I'm a practical optimist. And if I have my practical hat on and I look at the changes that happen, and I just look at the industry I'm in the financial community, we now have this thing, GFANZ, Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. Over 550 financial institutions have set targets for how they're investing and financing their whole portfolio to decarbonize in line with the science by 2050. They're setting 2030 targets sector by sector. We're working together on how to think about how to unlock finance at scale for these new technologies and in these difficult to finance markets that we've been speaking about as well. And that's only in the last few years. And it's CEOs that are engaging in these platforms directly. It's at the top of these companies that are transforming. So I'm an optimist because I just see the speed actually at last, after many, many years of negotiations in the COP systems, after even more decades of knowing about the science and the reality of the science that we've known about for a long, long, long time. I'm an optimist because actually the amount of change we're happening in the last few years, even in such a difficult environment, is huge. And as I mentioned, the amount now of investment we're having flowing, the changing economics of clean investment in a small amount of time, the technology innovations we're having. Again, I think we can be optimistic, but we can't, we have to push hard.
Celine, thank you very much for joining us today. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks, Eri.